Awesome. Looks like we are streaming. Welcome everyone to Privacy Studios. This is the home of Your Bytes, Your Rights. We are a live about data ownership, digital rights, and your privacy. In episode 34, we talk about the PermaWeb. What the heck is that? Well, it's the version of the web that never forgets. Is that a dystopian future without privacy and second chances? Or perhaps simply a transparent society where accountability matters? I'm 𝒂𝒊𝒕𝒚, the founder of Privacy Plan and a local data privacy researcher. I live at the intersection of privacy and data about privacy. I'm here with my co-host, Chris Kmeyer, managing partner at Sustiny Capital. Chris runs a VC fund, focuses on blockchain tech. He's into privacy, identity, the future of money, and central bank digital currencies. Say hi, Chris.
Hey, and as usual, if something was wrong with the stream, always blame me, because I'm trying to be a disc jockey here and I keep failing at that. So we're currently looking for someone to take over that gig, but we first need some sponsors to finance that. So if you are self-identified in that respect, please reach out to Jeff or me. This way we can make this even more professional.
Awesome. Well, Chris, one of our guests today is in the audience. We need to pull Krishna up to the panel.
Allowed to talk, promote to panelist. There we go.
Awesome. We've got Krishna 𝒂𝒊𝒕𝒚, founder and CEO of Data. Actually, how do you pronounce your company's name, Krishna? Is it 𝒂𝒂𝒍𝒊𝒕𝒚? I never actually asked you how you pronounce that. I'd say a data platform for zero-party consumer privacy, but I'll let Krishna explain and introduce himself a little bit further to our audience. You there, Krishna?
Oh, you know what? I promoted the wrong person. As I said, as usual, it's my fault. Always. All right. Krishna, do you feel promoted now? Houston? Houston?
Looks like he's there.
Yeah, he might still work.
I don't know if you want me to chime in. I'm happy to be a panelist. I've gone to related talks and conferences and spoken, but otherwise I will drop back down and just observe.
Whatever you want to do. This is a very informal chat, and we are less prepared than usual.
Hey, John,
okay, yeah.
you can stay. You can stay up here, John. We'd love to talk with you. Looks like Krishna may have found his voice though. Let's talk with Krishna first. You there, Chris? Krish? Maybe not. We're not hearing anything. All right. Well, maybe we'll try to get Krishna back on the line. But let's talk with John Nash. John, introduce yourself to our audience. No, we're having difficulties here. Anybody want to talk?
I got an unmute request, so yeah, happy to if you want. I can give some background.
Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my name is 𝒂𝒂𝒍𝒊𝒕𝒚, and I've been researching decentralized and distributed technologies for about 20 years since Publius was published, and watching Freenet and watching IPFS and a few lesser known technologies that seem to have totally slipped under the radar, like Auth System. And this talk caught my attention, today's event, because you mentioned permanent, like this idea with blockchain that we want stuff there forever is not a good idea, as you kind of alluded to. But I think there's a fix. I think the concept of knowledge horizons is critical. And I brought this up at Reinventing the Web of Trust with Chris Allen, and it went over quite well with that group. Because the idea, if you want to save humanity's knowledge, you can't have everyone see everything. You'll end up with least common denominator knowledge across the entire system. That will be very bad, because there are people committed to making knowledge disappear. And when I say committed, remember the statues that were blown up in the Middle East. There are people that will do literally anything to suppress other knowledge. So it's critical that knowledge is accessible, but it's also critical that everyone can only see out to a horizon, a virtual horizon. That's the knowledge they're interested in, the communities they're interested in. Connecting the whole world turns out to be a very, very bad idea. So I've spent the last 10 to 20 years figuring out how do we do that technically? How do we actually make that happen and enable global scale knowledge sharing without diluting humanity's knowledge to least common denominator?
That's awesome. But now I'm obviously disappointed that you're not really John Nash. But we got Krishna back.
Yeah, sorry about that. While switching, I lost my audio. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm Krishna Kartiketa, founder of 𝒂𝒂𝒍𝒊𝒕𝒚. Jeff, to your question, it's 𝒂𝒂𝒍𝒊𝒕𝒚, data and excellence, 𝒂𝒂𝒍𝒊𝒕𝒚. And we are working on protecting consumer data privacy and security for enterprises.
Excellent, excellent. Well,
should I give an introduction to how we see topology, and we break it down from there, because I'm really interested what the beautiful mind has to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, we have been also working on what we internally call decentralized software solutions, blockchain being one example of that in my mind, for the past 22 years. And if I count our peer-to-peer efforts in the voice over IP space, then since 1994, so whatever that amounts to. And so the way I look at the current topology is largely driven by database solutions, and kind of by definition, you cannot protect databases. You have to have a permissions layer, and there it's very difficult to then not give an undue amount of access to a large number of people. We just heard that yet again in the hearings around the Twitter whistleblower. But the larger point there being is that based on that, we have all these different data silos that are controlled by whoever doesn't actually own the data usually. And so the point of that being is we really never developed the World Wide Web. What people are using right now is the commercial web. So whenever people think they're online and they're Googling something, they're actually on some commercial silo. They're interacting with one commercial company, and they are within those walled gardens being social engineered to whatever ends this particular entity deems useful. So in order to fix that, and that's now we're coming to the thesis, is we need to reverse this paradigm from what I call a push paradigm to a pull paradigm, where the nodes are actually the users and they set the agenda, and then from setting that agenda, the agenda being, oh, I actually want to be informed and don't want to be manipulated, you get then information pulled into your awareness space, and then ultimately also from there get to own all what we call your digital dust, because you need that as a filter for that particular information that you're looking at. On a very simple example, if I present you information in a language that you don't speak, then it's spam, it's useless to you. Even if I present it to you in a language that you speak, but it's outside of your vocabulary, of your understanding, of your reach of that particular discipline, it's also useless to you, right? And so we haven't really done a great job structuring information distribution in that particular way, and I'm super excited still, even after 10 years of people trying to deploy these solutions, not quite understanding that we're working off a paradigm shift, that we at least have the primitives to do so. End of rant, and we really need a sign for that. But so the beautiful mind, what does the beautiful mind have to say about that?
Yeah, I agree. We are at a paradigm shift in software. That's what I believe in. We start off with when I started as a programmer. So when I was writing code, I assumed that everything is open. There's no security, there's no privacy, everything is open. If we talk about Unix permissions, we assume that the permissions are 777. So that means everyone has access to everything. Then when as we mature or as we evolve in development, we try to log the systems and control and define who has access to it and who doesn't have access to it. Putting that, the thought of where does that my data sit, like whether it is enterprises or whether it is consumers. And the other thing that I think about is, right now, we are going to someone's home and we are trying to promote our product. It doesn't look good. Like if you go to someone's party and if you are trying to promote your company in someone's property, it's like you are invading you're entering into their property and breaking some of the rules, right? And if they like it, they'll allow. If they don't, they'll take the data down or your promotion down. I feel like we are in that state. Everyone became a journalist. We write articles, whether it is our opinion or facts or other information that we know, and we put it in someone's property. If they like it, or if that aligns with their business, they'll promote. If not, they'll take it down. I've seen so many examples, even on LinkedIn. Like if you try to write something that goes against LinkedIn, against LinkedIn, then your post would be either taken down or algorithmically deprioritized, and you don't have any control. So coming back to your shift in paradigm, I agree. Companies and consumers need a place where they don't have to worry about invading into someone's property and trying to store the data or promoting their content or something like that. It happens to companies too. Like if Google goes and tries to promote their product on Amazon, Amazon is going to deprioritize. And similarly, Amazon is trying to do that on Google or their competitors' platform, they're going to deprioritize. So that happens at the enterprise level and also at the consumer level. So there is a need for a paradigm shift, which again is like where the data is in the owner, the producer's control, and they can decide where they want to surface it and where they don't want to surface it, and who can pull it and who cannot pull out that data. So we are in a shift, paradigm shift, and a lot of people don't know that they are already in this shift, unfortunately, but it is the reality.
Yeah, I mean, some of the worst violations also, like in a grammatical way that I see, is that people keep confusing DLTs and blockchains. And so what I mean by that specifically, DLTs are kind of more of the same, distributed ledger technology, kind of more of the same, and in a way probably worse. They're shared databases, at least in my definition, in my understanding of that paradigm, whereas blockchains are state machines that just change the control over a set of bytes from A to B, right? But John, I was trying to reach out to you if you're still on, and I keep addressing you as John, is because I don't know your actual name.
There we go. Sorry, I had to unmute. I'm getting set up so I can actually appear on camera.
Excellent.
No, it's this goes right back to one of the key problems that we're having in general is identity. So I actually helped John. He asked me to take over a local security meetup, Southwest Cybersecurity Forum, and so we only have the one account. Like, digital identity was never a solved problem online. So I didn't realize I had logged in to run the last meeting. So when I re-logged in, now I'm showing up as him, right? So this is one of the many, many mistakes that we keep seeing because we don't have a way of having identity that's meaningful. Your identity is owned by everyone but you.
Yeah.
And one of the other panelists was talking about, right, like when you put a post critical of LinkedIn on LinkedIn, of course they're going to take it down, right? And so the same thing with identity, they can do that because your group of contacts in this feudal internet that we've created, it's not your group of contacts. It's entries in LinkedIn's database, entries in Google's database. And if you want to have meaningful trust, which would allow you to deal with spam and other issues, you have to be able to create your own identity, and it has to be long-lived. And one of the key things that keeps trust working is it takes a long time to build up trust and prove that you are trustworthy and prove that you are not malicious. And then it just takes an instant to lose it.
Yeah.
So that incentivizes correct behavior because, you know, like the reason spam works is you don't have to build any trust. You send 3 million emails, if even a fraction of a percent reply and fall for whatever you're doing, you make a ton of money. So we need a way for people to start building long-running trust, and everyone cringes because they're thinking of how it's worked today. But it's if you can control it and you can create pseudonyms. A lot of the stuff that people look at anonymity and they say we want anonymous systems, no, you don't. Because there's no way to ever build trust if you don't know who it is at all, ever. You want pseudonymous systems where you can build trust and get the protection of hopefully unlinkability and not have that ID linked to who you are. but build trust within a community over time to prove that you can do beneficial things within that community.
Yeah, and Jeff is laughing because he's expecting one of my usual rants on that topic because I've been speaking on the topic of digital identity for more than a decade now. So it's one of these very unhelpful metaphors because identity, that's a different topic of technology altogether, right? So this is like brain gate and so forth. What we're talking about in like a information sharing system, like what we call okay, so we're on the same page.
But you have to know where it's coming from, right? You need the identity to use it.
No, I like that. I like what he's saying, right? Because I've actually been trying to figure out intellectually how do we develop a reputation economy.
Yeah,
it's more really what he's talking about, right?
Yeah, it's more nuanced
without developing a surveillance economy.
Yeah, it's more nuanced than that because 99% of the time you actually don't care about the individual. You care about the function. So what I mean by that, so what we're working on right now is what I call the agency attribution layer. And so before the show, we had this discussion about Oracle functions, right? So in order for these things to work at scale, we need to be able to relate back to observable reality in a reliable way. That's what we're talking about. Not trust is kind of the squishy term. Reliability is something that I can observe and then I don't have to trust because I see things, right? Like it's kind of this trustlessness of the original Bitcoin discussion, essentially. I see it. I don't have to trust anybody. I see that this transaction occurred. I can validate it. Right? And so the point there being is the way I try to explain this, I'm always interested to get more feedback on that, is I see this in this bifurcated way. There is systems, let's call them IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, where I can reliably pull information into the network. So I can reliably get information. This was the temperature at this location and the air pressure at this particular point in time because I get it from this particular weather station. This weather station has been performing for a certain period of time and has always provided reliable data. Obviously, you can never exclude that something is going to be manipulated, but let's assume that is as reliable as we can make it from a technology perspective. Then there's a lot of other things where we need human intervention, right? So there's a lot of things where I just need to get information from a person that's attesting to something that is happening in meat space. I moved a carton from left to right, and I signed the fact that I moved it from left to right, and now it's on this container ship on the way there, and I'll sign for that. And so the point there being is, I think what we need is these kind of very, very nuanced, let's call them reputation system that are task oriented, because obviously I don't care that John Doe was the one that's moved the carton. I just care that this particular persona, that's my term for that, has that particular a reputation score for this particular task, because maybe he is really good at moving carton from A to B, but when it comes down to taking care of his parakeet, he is not that good. Right?
But the question is, because I actually kind of hate the term trustless. I think blockchain, which I'm not a fan of, if anyone's read my writings, not a fan. It's not trustless. You trust in this group amortized temporary membership. Like you basically trust that most of the people involved won't turn against you at any one time.
Sure.
Like a totally trustless system is just flipping a coin or choosing some other source of entropy and just dumbly doing whatever it says. That's trustless. Everything else you have to trust somewhere. And it helps if we do trust mapping and we map out where is the trust in a given system. So it's interesting what you're saying. If you have it just based on tasks, though, how do you establish reliability over time? Because I do agree with you that trust is about predicting reliable behavior.
Well, essentially, you're staking that, right? So think about your Amazon seller. If I had a 5-star rating for 1,000 sales, it's very important to me that it stays like that, right? So the first time I get a 1-star rating, it's going to affect my overall rating, my ability to sell things on Amazon. Right, and so that comes down to everything else. That's why I said it's very nuanced there, because you have something at stake at that point in time, right? So you're building this up, and unfortunately, what we let happen in the past, now a lot of people wasted all this effort in trusting Facebook, LinkedIn with their data that they aggregated, their connection that they aggregated, put themselves into a situation where they have to comply to whatever arbitrary platform rules they are. And by the way, that's obviously true in a greater sense, as in if your ISP doesn't like what you're doing and decides, well, I told you you have XYZ unlimited access, but my fine print says that XYZ unlimited means we're going to start throttling you after you start serving web pages from your home, right? So that's another level. And if it then comes down to things like content inspection, and you're in another country, you're looking at a whole different level of censorship before even reaching any of those platforms, right?
Okay, I think we're conflating a few issues there.
Sure.
I agree, censorship, right? Like that's another thing, but there's some really interesting work with like off system, owner-free file system. That is it's a bright net. Everyone talks about open nets and dark nets, but it's the only bright net concept I've seen, which has some fascinating mathematical properties. But to go back to the trust for a second, like, yes, the reason with Amazon reviews and all review systems, and they're getting gamed like crazy now,
sure,
because Sybil attacks, you have no way of protecting against a Sybil attack. So you could just flood it with a whole bunch of bogus people because there is no long-running trust.
Yeah, you have to make it
Ideally,
expensive, right? You have to make it expensive. That's why, yeah, you say it's a verified purchase, and
yeah, not just expensive, but I trust certain people, just like you said earlier, in different contexts. I don't want every vote to count the same. Right. People I know, if I'm asking for a restaurant, some of my friends give really good recommendations. I want their votes to count for more because that's how it works in the real world.
Yeah.
I don't want just any random person to count for the same. So I think you have to have web of trust. You have to have proper identity as a foundation for everything we're talking about.
Yeah, and you're totally right. I was, for the sake of time, conflating a lot of different, a couple of different things. We actually developed our own taxonomy for that to have useful discussions around that, because what we're talking about at the end of the day is legal technologies, as in you need to be able to differentiate between certain concepts: authentication versus verification, certification, identification, and so forth. And unfortunately, I've been part of hundreds of discussions where these concepts are consistently being conflated, and then you have to ask, okay, you're saying identify, what do you mean? Oh, I want to make sure that the person who holds the passport is the person standing in front of me. Oh, that's what you mean. So this is actually this particular legal concept because it pertains to a particular government issued certification, and these are the prerequisites for that to stick, so to speak, right? But it's very, very nuanced, unfortunately, and by and large these efforts are driven by engineers who have never been exposed to these kind of legal systems, right? So I taught privacy law right after law school some 20 years ago. And so that's where the first thing you always do is you start with all these definitions. What does that mean? What is this particular like little piece of information, right? And then you'll try to explain that to call center agents. I could only do this for so long before I decided, okay, that's not something that I want to do for a long time. That seems very tedious. Like I'm a good teacher as long as I don't have to teach more than once a year.
Yeah, we gave up on formal methods and carefully defining what we're doing in engineering decades ago.
So what is it that you're working on today? So tell me.
I have been trying to put together, I'm going to have to change the name because they already used Nebula for something else and I didn't grab the trademark. But what I would like, the gist of it, the very quick version is, if you've looked at Freenet.
Yeah.
Familiar? So Freenet's great. I love the fact that IPFS is interesting. I've met Juan a few times. I like the work they're doing. They got a great team. The problem with IPFS, and it's strategic on their part, which is smart, right now the way it's built, it's only really suitable for data that's just kind of benign, no copyright issues, and nothing that's sensitive, because it's way too easy to find the data. And then the other issue is when you put data into the system, it's only on your node. It doesn't balance anywhere, and that's why they tried to make Filecoin.
Right.
Whereas Freenet, what's amazing is when you put data into Freenet, it immediately balances across nodes all over the world, because censorship resistance, right, is one of the key design attributes. So once you put the data in, when that insert finishes, if your computer just blows up, that data is still globally available. Now, the problem is that data is globally available until it gets evicted from the system by newer data. And because, keeping anonymity and pseudonymity, like that's another major design goal, is to make sure you have that in Freenet. There's no way to say, please keep this data in the system forever. You have to keep finding the data or reinserting the data. So as a base layer, I'd love a system where, there's some great articles. I've been talking with Alexander Blanc about the cloud. He's been saying, hey, get out of the cloud. The cloud is terrible. We've had some good discussions when we were doing a podcast. We had him on, and I just saw a headline saying 81% of C-suite, like executives, CTOs, are saying, let's get out of the cloud because the price is rising and it doesn't make sense anymore. So we have the technology to be able to put data in a computer and not worry about where it is. Like, let's let the computers manage where the data is and keep it accessible for as long as it needs to be accessible, as long as any human cares about it. And there's three components to that. You need identity. You need a system to balance and move the data around and make sure it stays available. And again, Filecoin's done some great work there, but they're not the only ones. And then the third piece, that the reason Freenet never caught on, you need a way of finding the data. And we're seeing how critical that is with Google owning the algorithm. And a lot of these opaque algorithms that are shifting, right? They're getting gamed by SEO, but then they're also just Google, in the original paper, right? Google, they're saying you can never have someone pay for search ranking because the whole system will fall apart. And now that's what they do. That's all of what they do, is making their money by paying for search ranking. So algorithmic sovereignty, like ideally, and with Kaji, that new search engine that you got to pay $10 a month for, I had a friend showing me their account. They've implemented some of that where you can actually boost and reduce sites and actually modify the algorithm to a small degree, which is really powerful, really nice. The problem is they're a company. And so at some point they will get investors. Those investors will want money. And that data of who you promoted and who you demoted in your search results is going to be worth a lot of money. So it's just a matter of time until they sell that out. And once again, you don't have that. And it's, they're showing you what they want you to see. So I want a system that, the short of it is, I want a system that delivers on the promise of what we've built on the actual computer science and allows us to put knowledge out there. And if it's good knowledge, like this podcast, right? Hopefully this doesn't wink out of existence in the next, month or 2 or 3, which is the last numbers I've heard for the general internet.
Yeah. Note to self, copy this to Odyssey.
So, we should be able to trust our technology, and we're entering a digital dark age where stuff just disappears as fast as you put it in, and we've got to get past that.
Yeah, and everybody should read the original white paper of Google. I think it was still called 𝒂𝒏 back then. It's still on Stanford's website, so it should be easily findable. And so, yeah, in one of the last paragraphs, Larry specifically mentions if we ever introduce paid advertising, that defeats the actual purpose. And obviously that's exactly what they did. But then also what people don't know is that Google and then now Alphabet actually didn't go public on that particular IP because it's actually owned by Stanford. They only have an unlimited license. But the larger point there being is, no, there's unlimited business models if you do away with advertising. Right? Because in my mind, there should be tens of thousands of search engines. There should be search engines that are tailored for lawyers. There should be search engines tailored for dentists. There should be search engines for people that study history. Right? And so Google keeps squashing all of those efforts. There's a whole website to that, the googlegraveyard.com, I think, that documents those, because whenever something smarter comes up with an interesting business model, they tend to just buy that team out, and then they sit on the roof at Google and drink Kool-Aid and let those software efforts die. We're actually working with an actual search engine right now on the go-to-market strategy, which is actually they call it a content engine, but that will do that for the first time, because like you said, you're not searching anything on Google, right? You're running a query against Google's databases, and 100% of that content in those databases is specifically written for that algorithm. Otherwise, it's not going to be indexed, right? It's kind of the self-defeating mechanism. You created your own ecosystem of flies or larvas or whatever you want to call those insects that contribute to what sits in their databases, but it's not content. And then the last point there is what I personally find super interesting, and we should do a separate show on that, is advanced machine learning algorithms like GPT-3 that can now detect obvious lies, right? So we can mark up things that are simply logical fallacies, right? Where, like the example you made earlier of conflations, I would contend that at least 50% of headlines, specifically that if they're coming out of Washington, D.C., are conflations and or have some other logical fallacies built in, right? I.e. Something like a virus caused the economy to shut down.
Okay.
And that's obviously that's a non sequitur, right? That's just a logical fallacy.
Yeah, but I'm really curious. So you said I've never seen any work on successfully detecting those with the generative language models.
Yeah,
I would love if you could share some of that.
Yeah, just Google for GPT-3 logical fallacies. You'll find a academic paper on that topic. So it's around the corner.
Okay.
So that's what I want. I want everybody to install a browser plugin that will basically mark up everything, or just, for me, as far as I'm concerned, strike it out. It's like, okay, this is just a logical fallacy. I don't even need to read this because this is just some nonsense that you put together. And if nonsense is more than 50%, well, then just filter it out of my search result altogether, right? I don't need to see that. Because that's clearly just some form of motivated reasoning. And oftentimes people don't even know that they're doing this, because like reasoning and logic is not actually taught anymore, apparently, in high school, or for that matter in academia in general, because I have discussions with people that teach at universities, and I see that in their papers, right? So that like, you don't see that this is a logical fallacy just on face value. Like, you came up with this particular definition, but your own definition is already false. So at that point in time, whatever you say afterwards is not worth discussing, right? Because you just told me that water is dry, and everything else that you're building your arguments on is based on this particular just logical fallacy. Jeff, we need a flag. Chris is going on off the deep end again.
Before he jumps in, so what you mentioned with Google is Goodhart's law, right? Great example of when you make a metric a target, it starts to drive the system.
Yes, exactly it. Yes, that's a very good observation.
So let's bring this back. We've actually got a question. John Nash, could you give us your actual name again, or are you trying to be synonymous?
No, I'm not trying to be synonymous. It's 𝒂𝒂𝒒𝒂𝒂𝒂. And I've done a lot of cybersecurity stuff in Arizona. I've been a software developer for 25 years, and then I kind of got accidentally pulled into cybersecurity. Started with a cold call to the police department, and then ended up doing a whole bunch of stuff with Homeland and FBI, and organizing panels of feds at Comic-Con, and working on Cybersecurity Canyon. The most recent stuff is we opened the Advanced Cyber Systems Lab over at Gateway Community College to actually play with some next-gen technologies, because everyone's always running around, everything's on fire all the time, because it's full of weird machines, everything's broken, and it's like, we've had the technologies to build software using formal methods that is very hard to hack, because there's no bugs, or almost no bugs, if you actually do a full formal analysis, right? EAL5 software, it's been around, there's plenty of military systems that have been built to this standard. And there's even work, if you look at the Tokeneer work that Praxis did with NSA, right? They delivered it. There were only 4 bugs ever found in that system. And it took 1/3 the development time. So there's a lot of this. I gave a talk at Phoenix Security and Audit Conference about unknown knowns, which was kind of a reminder to the industry, hey guys, there's like decades worth of stuff that we could be using. And instead of just doing more training, which doesn't work, it will never be 100%, we could just fix the software, and then clicking on a bad link wouldn't give your computer to someone on the other side of the globe. You can click links all day long, which is what most people are getting paid to do, with no risk. So I've been involved in a number of efforts to try to just get people to remember, and I've talked to a lot of guys who are in the end of their career, from Australia, from England, and also locally, who this is not unknown stuff. We know how to do this. Right. It's just the industry makes more money when we sell new solutions, right? So we keep selling a new solution, new subscription, and stacking it higher and higher, which is increasing the attack surface. And it's actually increasing the capabilities of our adversaries. So anyways, the last bit is, the reason I'm on John Nash's account is he asked me to take over SWCSF, the Southwest Cybersecurity Forum. And so we set up this device to stream, and I forgot to de-set it up.
Okay. Yes. So the way I like to describe is, you need to build the permissions into the data that you're creating itself, right?
So you're talking like OCAP capabilities model.
I don't know. I'm familiar with that particular term.
That's where you merge the permission
Yes.
with the resource. That's object capabilities. Yes,
Okay,
that's a
yeah,
really good idea.
Yeah, then we're on the same page. I just think until somewhat recently we didn't really have the compute power to do that, right? Because
It actually takes less.
It does?
That's the crazy thing. If you look at the research for like capsicum under FreeBSD or Austral or any of these other things, if you don't have to like check an entire file system hierarchy all the way up like POSIX, when you're like, here's what you're allowed to do, here's the file handle you can do it on, it's one check.
Okay.
Like it's easier and faster and less error prone when you do OCAP.
Yeah. So the typical like mental scenario I'm usually walking through is I walk by a security camera, right? And so there was actually a real life case here locally. A friend of mine was in charge in building the policies for police body cameras, right? As in, should these be able to just de-anonymize you, right? So makes for a great dating tool if I'm a 25-year-old policeman and walk by the beach and I can just figure out who everybody is, right? So by just using facial recognition with my body cam. But the obvious answer is that shouldn't be possible. There must be a procedure, right? So there must be a very narrowly defined procedure that immediately decides, okay, by default, there is no facial recognition. And now we already actually have, I think, some lawsuits in that respect, obviously. But the larger point there being is I'm still unaware of anybody providing that capability to anybody. As in, hey, when I provide you with the body cam, I also provide you with this very, very granular permissions layer that faces into the hardware itself, essentially, right? So it's built into the hardware itself that sends this particular signal. There's a data request being made to run a query against the database. Well, there needs to be permissions injected, i.e. a court order or whatever the right permission is before this query can be executed. And obviously I'm simplifying that, but are you aware of any of those systems existing today?
Refine it a little bit more. So I guess what I'm hung up on before I answer that question is this idea, like, yes, there are databases that allow facial recognition and we can kind of limit access to that. But the problem is, as we've seen with some of the new generative models with DALL-E and Stable Diffusion and all the others that have come out, right? Like Stable Diffusion is open source. So anything that can be done in a private system will be quickly mirrored in open source and applied however people want. And data, just the problem with biometrics, right? Biometrics are your username, not your password. And part of the reason is you leak them all the time. If you go to the beach and you're not wearing a full mask that covers and obscures the shape of your face and head, you're just, anyone who's looking at you can collect that data. Any camera looking at you can collect that data. And that data can be held onto and it can be enriched later. Like LaTanya Sweeney has done some amazing research going all the way back to only you, your doctor, and many others may know, one of her first papers, where she showed anonymized medical data sets. If you had the person's birth date, the exact date of birth, and gender and zip code, 75% of the records in the set could be re-correlated with nothing more than that.
Yeah, it's 85, but yes.
Oh, okay.
But no, so incidentally, so Jeff and I obviously get all the news flashes, and there was just another court order according to BIPA, so the biometric identification laws in Illinois, and what was the verdict, $400 million or something? And so the case, and I'm probably bastardizing it, but it was something to the extent that there were fingerprints being used for authentication and access to a certain area, but the company that was doing that and collecting these never got the permission of those people to use that, and so they got slapped really hard. And so that's the right warning signal, as in, these people didn't know you were doing that. And
so how do you, like, when you say how do you stop that, how do you make permission? Like, okay, fine, we can lock down and make permission within the police database, but if someone creates their own database, which is becoming increasingly feasible, we can't do anything about what they're doing.
Yeah, that's why it comes down to the hardware itself. The hardware cannot allow. It needs to create the data at the moment of intake in a way that this is not possible, built in the permissions, right?
So are you talking like the Clipper chip?
Honestly, I don't have the answer, but like,
because I think that was a bad idea that we all said no to in the 90s,
no,
but now it sounds like we're ready to say yes.
Conceptually, and so the framework and the line of thinking I always offer for that. Think of not the United States and other more liberal countries, but think of authoritarian countries that use these type of technologies to oppress their constituents, their population, right? So we want to do actively the opposite of what these countries do, and want to actively disable these capabilities in hardware and software solutions. But I mean, usually you need some hardware to create the software solution. So you need to be able to inject this at the chip level, so to speak. And I think,
but I mean, look at something like China, right, where they were making the majority of the chips. Like, they're making the chips.
Yeah.
You can't, slip anything into their chips. Like, they're making their own stuff. Their hardware is going to do whatever they want it to do. We have no way of influencing that meaningfully.
No, I think we do. We have the purchasing power.
Oh, okay.
We have the purchasing power, right? So you tell them we won't accept these type of chips anymore. They have to do X, Y, Z. Otherwise, we won't buy them, right? So put export controls into that, just like we did with Huawei, where we decided, okay, yeah, you're building spyware into your hardware. We're not going to allow you to export that anymore into our country. Right?
I mean, externally.
Yeah.
But internally, right, we have no ability to stop what they're doing. But yeah, I guess externally we have some small ability.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a priori and post hoc. So that's why I was making that post hoc example of a company facing extinction because they violated that particular law knowingly. I think that was kind of the catch there, Jeff, right? That they actually were aware that they were doing that, and someone pointed out, hey, you're violating BIPA, and they kept doing it at the end of the day. And for those who haven't read the Facebook settlement, Facebook also paid $650 million to the state of Illinois for violating BIPA. They were training their AI on facial recognition without the citizens' consent in Illinois. And there's, I think, now 5 other states that will pass basically the same law. And obviously that's how it needs to be, right? Because people keep saying nonsense like data is in the oil and stuff. That's obviously false. I can give you a complete copy of Cambridge Analytica's data right now, and it would be entirely useless to you because you don't have the capability of creating this kind of echo chamber of information around me. That echo chamber of information is based on location awareness and being able to de-anonymize you at that particular moment when it's advantageous for you to manipulate someone. So that's why, like I keep telling people, Google doesn't sell advertising. They sell social engineering as a service to the highest bidder. And it's very important that people understand that, because even people in Congress are getting that close to understand that. And that's very important, because otherwise we keep asking for the wrong thing. So we keep asking for things like the right to be forgotten. That's nonsense. You don't ever forget anything that's digitally observed. The obvious right request is, I, as a human being, have the unalienable right not to be observed without my consent.
That's a really interesting question.
No, I mean, observation changes behavior. If I know I'm being observed, you're messing with human agency at that point in time. That is a violation of human rights.
So within what scope, though? Because it's always been held, and again, not a lawyer, but I have friends who are that I have discussions with. But when you're in public, you don't have a right to not be observed. When you're in private, you do, to some degree, right?
No. But that's just blatantly false. You always have the right. That's a human right. Forget about public-private spaces. So the conflation here is always twofold. It's conflating laws and rules. So because states have taken on kind of the language of law, states and regulators don't make laws. They make rules. So the difference is laws are something that you discover. Technology only integrates with laws. As a technologist, you cannot ignore the laws of reality. You cannot ignore the rules of physics and so forth. You have to integrate your technology with that. And then rules are kind of post hoc, addressing the behavior of people. So hence, you need to build your technology. The request is always the same. Build your technology to serve the human. So that's why we keep creating these inefficient rules that these regulators keep calling laws, and that's why people think they are laws. They are obviously not, right? So There is a law that says you should not be driving more than 65 miles an hour on the freeway. I never do. I always drive much slower, right? Anywho, so the point is there is obvious. If you actually wanted to make an effective law, you would just send a certified letter to all the car manufacturers saying, well, guess what? You cannot make cars that drive more than 65 miles an hour on the freeway, and you're done, right? So you can have all the policemen that's sitting at the side of the road with their little radar guns do something useful instead of preying on citizens, right? But that falls under the same category, right? As in people putting out these propaganda statements, they're making a law saying that X, Y, Z shouldn't happen, like cryptocurrencies should be regulated. That's just propaganda on face value, right? But anyway, I think we got a little bit off topic from our actual topic.
So let me add one refinement though.
Sure.
So you mentioned data is the new oil. This is not my insight. I think it was Bruce Schneier's, if I remember right. Data is the new plutonium, because unlike oil, if you pile too much enriched plutonium in one place, you get an explosion. And we've seen that with all the breaches. If you get too much data in one place, the incentives to grab that, breach that, use it, resell it, it's always too high. So data is the new plutonium, not the new oil.
And it has half-life. It loses value. Like your data, which is 10-year-old, doesn't have much value than the data.
Not always.
Got, right?
Not always. There are cases with like high value targets where knowing where they live for the last 10 or 20 years is extremely high value.
Yes.
Yeah, it depends. So it's contextual.
Yeah, but back to the PermaWeb, I guess, Jeff, right? So, yeah, there's two things to that. So, technology cannot be uninvented. So, even if we wanted to things not to exist forever, the reality is there's certain information that will live out there about you, about us forever, and there's nothing you can do about it. Even that's to a large extent true today, right? So there's on average about 4,000 to 5,000 databases with as many records, so 4,000 to 5,000 records that have your PII in there right now. And a lot of those entities you have never heard of, right? Which is something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. But the larger point there being is now that we have these decentralized software solutions and decentralized storage system, we need to be even more cognizant about how we are creating data, right? Because it always comes down to the moment of creation. Unless you're capable of building a permission into that layer, into that creation process, I should say, you shouldn't be creating in the first place. It's kind of like do no harm kind of thing. So I would interpret this as, first of all, don't create this data if you don't have to begin with, right? So falls onto this whole data minimization paradigm maybe. But for me, again, I'm a technologist and someone who just wants to see freedom in the world and not have these technology be used against us. And by and large, the way I always like to describe this is we are allowing these particular gatekeepers, doesn't matter if it's your ISP, your quote-unquote search engine or social media company, to treat us like a self-driving car that decides what route we should take to whatever direction that the car finds useful, right?
That's it's interesting, guys. You're talking about this moment of creation, this observations about us, and if everything that's observed about us is permanent, that's pretty scary. One thing that is sort of interesting, though, is that if people are making these observations and then also making inferences, that's even a little bit scarier. I think it's really interesting, though, that the Colorado AG just made some proposed rulemaking based upon the Colorado Privacy Act to say that if you're inferring sensitive information about people, you have to actually delete that information really quickly, like actually within 12 hours. So, for instance, if you collect a bunch of PII about me and then infer for some reason that I'm a Republican, or infer that I'm gay, or infer that I'm a Christian, or any kind of sensitive information like that, right? You have to delete it like within 12 hours, which is essentially like immediately, right? You can't store it, essentially is what they're saying, which I think is pretty amazing and would be interesting. Obviously, it's targeted at data brokers, right? Who would probably create that information and want to sell it. And if you can't store it, you probably can't sell it. So I think that's a really interesting new take on this kind of information. But it sort of gets to the point of if all this information about us is permanent, is there any way to change that, or do we just have to live with it?
I don't think we can live with it. That's my point. I don't think that these things are optional. And that's, I think, what we need to get people to realize. And I always make this example. Last year, the damages from cybercrime already exceeded $6 trillion, larger than the GDP of most countries except two. And this is only going to increase. And by and large, that's an externality of legacy software solutions or database solutions, because you cannot protect databases because you're giving undue access to a large amount of people, and unless we change the overall architecture and topology, there's no way out of that, right? So and then the secondary problem is just simply that we need to be able to clean up this digital landfill that we call the World Wide Web, that we allow these companies like Alphabet, so Google and Facebook, to keep polluting with things that have nothing to do with reality, right? So that's the larger point. I want to just have a button that tells me, okay, what you're looking at is actual information. And there's two levels to that. A, the filter of if it has too many logical fallacies already based on cursory review by a simple algorithm, but then B, if no one takes ownership of that particular information, so no individual, well, then I want to be able to discard this as well. At least I want the option. That's the point, right? I want the option to discard it, as in, oh, no one takes ownership of that particular information. What does that mean, right? So that means that it's probably not something that I want to consume, because at the end of the day, I only put information out there because I'm seeking for peer review, right? So that's kind of my process, and that's, to me, it's the primary utility of that network. We're all in the same process here. There's this little startup called the Human Experience, which is about to fail, right, as far as I can tell, on a faster and faster trajectory. And unless we fix the way we do information distribution, is gonna fail, because half of the world thinks that reality can be debated and that the world is flat and there's no such thing as global anthropomorphic climate change. My invisible God is prettier than yours. Well, whatever nonsense narrative you want to engage with is what these particular distribution system allow you to do and emphasize, right? So what they feed on, and that is pervasive. But again, it always starts at the moment of creation, of data creation, either. And then the secondary one is amplification, so how you distribute that.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to what you were saying. That's the consequence of selling basically psychological warfare as a service, right? Now, the other thing, you mentioned the $6 trillion, which is awesome, because I had quoted the old number from a few years ago that was $2 trillion. So it's getting much more expensive, almost exponentially. The other thing that people don't realize, I've given a talk called Doomsday Machines, which is a survey of all the lethal software bugs. And a lot of people are pretty surprised. They think that cybersecurity is the bigger threat, cyber warfare. So far, I only have one death that I can directly attribute to cyber warfare. The number right now of people who have been killed or had their lives destroyed by like software bugs is over 12,000. And the last two incidents, it's been growing exponentially from the Therac 25. The last two incidents have been algorithmic incidents where people have put an algorithm using this data to detect fraud. And that algorithm, flagged a whole bunch of people incorrectly. And so we're seeing algorithms are actually causing mass death and suffering with this data.
Yeah, 100% correct what you're saying. There is actual data out there from like the actual harm through cyber warfare, like the Ukraine example, like back in the day when Russia attacked the Ukrainian infrastructure when they were testing their weapons. So they shut down a couple of hospitals. They infected some supply chain solutions that then didn't have critical medication going to certain destinations. So there is trail and evidence for that. Actually, our our friend from the Darknet Diaries has a couple of good episodes on that. I highly encourage people to listen to that particular podcast. But yeah, the typical example in that space I always make, there's probably a child right now drinking bleach. And that child probably got that idea because they didn't feel well, they thought they had COVID, and then they started to do a quote-unquote research online, and they got themselves into a scenario where all of a sudden this echo chamber of misinformation persuaded them that this is the right course of action, right? So point there being is we must, and again, this is not some optional thing, we must create this forensic tools for real world outcomes. And that was kind of what's her name, Hagen? Facebook whistleblower was asking for. It's like, let's make this data available to researchers, and then let's attribute these outcomes in the real world to the distribution of information by these companies and hold them responsible for that. She didn't say the later part there, I added that, but that's clearly what should happen, right? So that's happening with all other technologies. I cannot just make a gas guzzler and then decide, well, these emission laws don't apply to me because, well, I'm Facebook and I built the Facebook car, and the Facebook car, just while it drives through my city, is just going to pollute the environment.
Yeah.
But we're allowing something far worse, right? So we're allowing them to turn like 100 million people into little lab rats that they condition to respond to certain amygdala influences, right? It's like, okay,
those EULAs and POSs are catching up with us.
Yeah. So, but we totally got off topic of what we wanted to talk about, really, which is the PermaWeb, right? So. I think what it drives home to me, and somehow we've usurped that term. I've been aware of that term since like the late 90s. But I think we need to drive more awareness that this is around the corner, right? So this is something that's going to happen, as in there will be information being published that you cannot pull back. It's going to be out there. For good and bad, right? So again, technology just provides functions. People always want to assign labels to technologies, right? So, but technology is neutral. It just provides function. You can use it for good, as in get the right information out there and avoid that certain entities suppress that information and make it available to those people that should have that. But obviously, it also works into the other direction. You put some false information out there about someone that's detrimental to their well-being for the rest of their life, and it's not going away, and you have no one to hold responsible for that. So that's also something.
Yeah, it's hard to change that, right? How do you pull back data that's incorrect in a PermaWeb?
Yeah, that's what I was able to ask. Isn't it the technology creator's responsibility to ensure that if I'm going to a bar and taking pictures, by default, the technology that I'm using to take pictures should de-anonymize or de-identify all the people except my point of interest. Like, let's say if I'm taking my selfie, then the technology should be able to allow my selfie to be shown on that picture and all the other spaces to be blurred. So that way, we're not allowing people to accidentally do something and put it on PermaWeb and risk others' lives.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably going to see a lot of new tech like that, but can we force tech like that on people? You know, I think it's unlikely.
Well,
just like trying to wrap data, you know, with controls. I think we're going to see more of that, right? So that at collection, when data gets created, it'll actually have access controls wrapped around it, right? The data just won't live as a piece of data. So your name and ID won't just be sitting there, in an Excel field, but it'll actually have access controls wrapped around it, right?
We have to make it unprofitable at the end of the day, right? So you're putting out certain technologies that's as an externality harming a large part of the population. Then we hold you responsible for putting out this technology. I mean, we do this with everything else, right?
Yeah. So exactly. Like if you look at the autopilot or autonomous cars, they are putting guardrails, right? So the same way, if whoever is creating these chips, again, Chris, it goes back to your suggestion of putting this technology in the chip, so it blurs the people who are not of point of interest and only focuses on people who are of interest. So if that happens at the chip level and at the technology manufacturers level, then we are in a way building guardrails, and we don't have to educate people or rely on people's consciousness.
I feel like there's going to be a whole lot of unintended consequences with that solution. This smacks of the Clipper chip, where they wanted to put key escrow into every device that had communication back in the 90s. This was the first crypto wars, and we all agreed at the time, after 5 years of intense discussion, this was a terrible idea that would be way more trouble than it was worth. And again, how are you identifying those people? How do you know who's the focus? There's so many questions. There's so many ways this could go very sideways. Like, this is one of those ideas that in theory, if it could just somehow magically work 100% of the time, yeah, it's a great idea. But reality is never like that, right? Engineering's never 100%.
Yeah.
So
I agree. There are technologies, like if you try to upload a song or a video onto YouTube, YouTube immediately captures the digital rights and says you are not the authorized owner. And even we have this digital rights management on when the songs are being pirated, industry came up with digital rights management. Similarly, we could have people rights management where if you're not that person, then you can't take a picture. Like if I'm in this Zoom,
okay,
and if I don't have your rights, I cannot take a